to be here. I'm still waking up from Salt Lake, so excuse me if I'm a bit incoherent, but thanks all for coming. My name is Huihan, and thanks Ted for the intro. Can I just to get a sense of the audience, could I maybe see a show of hands? Who of you has, let's say, visited their ancestral place in China? Oh, that's okay. Right. And can I ask, who of you is able to read Chinese? Okay. Good.
The shame
Well,
is real.
This is exactly the point that we're getting at. So maybe just to start off with a little bit of background. My name is Huihan. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, in Holland. My parents were from Indonesia, as were the 5 generations before them. So 6 generations before, they were from Fujian, from China. Indonesia, of course, was a Dutch colony when my ancestors arrived in Indonesia. So basically, my grandfather, my grandparents, you see that in the middle, so there's the 3 marriage pictures. On the left, it's my parents, then my grandparents, and my great-grandparents. So even my great-grandparents, my great-grandfather didn't speak any Chinese. So his father would have spoken Hokkien, southern Fujianese. He didn't. So I was really born and raised in a very Dutch environment, in Holland, and a Dutch environment. My grandfather actually went to a Dutch school in Indonesia, so the Dutch culture was already quite close to the family. From a very young age, I was always interested in hearing stories by my grandfather. He would sit on his lap and he would tell me stories about how he grew up on the sugar plantations in Indonesia, how 6 generations ago our first ancestor in Indonesia started with nothing but a horse on a sugar plantation, and he basically built a family fortune that 3 generations later was completely squandered by spoiled sons who threw it all away on gambling and horse racing and women. So yeah, I just loved those stories. I ate them up, and I always was curious to hear more. But I could never go further than Indonesia, and I think it was in my teens that it was really, yeah, there was something, a curiosity burning inside me. I want to go to China to see what it's like. But like the majority here, I didn't speak a word or read a word of Chinese. So I always had this double feeling of, I don't want to just go, but I do want to go, but you know, I need to study the language. So basically, I kept postponing it. And when I was about 25, 26, I thought, okay, well, what the hell, what's the worst that can happen? I'm just going to go. I finished my studies in Holland. And I gave myself half a year and thought, if it doesn't work out, I'll just come back and apply for jobs in the West. Long story short, I liked it and I stayed, so I still live in Beijing, wife and 2 kids now. And as I basically worked in consulting and very non-cultural, historical area of work, I started digging in my family history in China. So I found out where we were from southern Fujian. I traveled to some of the ancestral villages, and I noticed the impact that it had on me. It gave me a real feeling of, yeah, being connected with myself and history. And I'd love to hear the experience of the others who visited their ancestral villages. But I started then thinking, okay, well, I'm obviously not the only overseas Chinese, and I'm not the only one that's curious. Why is there no service helping people like me that would want to know more? So that's how the idea of my channel was came. So when I started doing the research on my family history, I ran into the same obstacles that basically most everybody that we help today run into. So first of all, there's a language gap, there are cultural barriers, there's a distance, a geographic distance. There's an assumption, fortunately a false assumption, that a lot of historical sources have been lost. I mean, a lot of them have been lost, Cultural Revolution, but a lot of them have actually also either have been saved, because the South, which is where people who left before 49 were from, Guangdong and Fujian, mostly the 2 southern provinces of China. They have always been, first of all, further away from the power center of Beijing, so the Cultural Revolution was slightly less rigidly applied there. And they've always been more culturally, well, I guess, aware or more valuing maintaining traditions more than in the north. Adding to that, in the 80s and 90s, since China's opening up, there's been a resurgence of clans, basically clans coming back together and doing a collective brain dump and jiapus. Can I see a show of hands? Who knows what a jiapu is? I came in late, so okay. Oh, well, then we can stop it. So they, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, in the 1890s, so a lot of the clan books, the jiapu and the zupu, they were actually re-edited. Elderly villagers came together and they collective brain dump and they rewrote their family tree. So that's on the assumption that a lot of historical sources are lost. We really feel, my and roots feel strongly about assembling and compiling a lot of the scattered resources that are there. Because there's so much information there, online, offline, inside China, outside China. The biggest problem is that it's very scattered. So, other obstacles, well, not knowing where to start. That's the key reason why we're here today. So let's just move on to that one. So how to start? A lot of people always ask me, so what do I need to start doing family research? And it's really quite simple. You need names. You need names of the place that your Chinese ancestor was from, preferably at the lowest administrative level, because you have provinces, prefectures, counties, towns, and villages. And you need names of the ancestor that left. And preferably all these names in Chinese characters. So let's start with the place. One very important difference between Western genealogy and Chinese genealogy is that in the West, most of the historical sources are maintained by central authorities, like church and state-related authorities. In the Chinese context, it was mostly all maintained by families or clans, so it's private hands. Some libraries and archives have useful documents, but really the essence is the family itself. And this importance, this relevance of the family is basically, I find it really interesting, it's encapsulated by one character. In Mandarin, it's jia, and in English, you have different words for family, for home, ancestral place, and for identity, for having a special skill or something. In Chinese, all those meanings are actually encapsulated, combined in one character, that's jia. So basically, the family, the home, like the attachment to the land, the geographic home, the location, as well as a sense of identity, that's all combined into one meaning. And that's really important to understand when you do family history research. That basically means you have to go back to the ancestral place, because that's where the core of the family history is basically set. You can, just in terms of characters, so to the right is the simplified modern character of Jia, and basically it is this is the character of a pig, and this is a roof. You can see the origins. Basically, it's a pig under a roof, and this comes from the Shang dynasty 3,000 years ago, when domestication of animals started. So a pig under a roof was basically seen as symbolic of a family, of a house where people live. So I just mentioned already, the ancestral place is the first thing that you need to look for. And just as an aside, if anybody has questions, just ask them straight away, because if it's flowing back and forth, it's always nice. I think the key challenges with place name, there are three key challenges. One is the fact that people often have names of places, but they're usually written in letters, because people have been in the US for a couple generations or elsewhere outside China. So one challenge is to go back from the Romanized versions of those places and go back to the characters. Another challenge is basically historical names have changed. So a lot of when the ancestors left and how that place was named then might not be how it's named now. A third one is basically jurisdictions of change. So, yeah, so basically names, a county that was named such and such could be named differently now. So those are three challenges. I can go in later if you want to, but those are three things that you need to be mindful of when you start digging into your family history. Ancestors' name. So same here, but it goes same here in the sense of the Romanized variants according to the dialect. If you have a name of an ancestor that left China, you might think, oh good, I have the name, but you first need to go back to the characters. You need to know how it was written in Chinese, because that's, if you want to find your ancestor's name in the clan book, you need the Chinese characters. A quick thing about names in itself. I don't know if people here are familiar, well, surnames obviously, but generation names. Yeah, I see a lot of people nodding, so that's so, yeah, there's a surname, a generation name, and then a personal name. So my name, for instance, Huihan Lie, in Chinese is Li Weihan. Li is my surname, Wei is my generation name. My paternal cousin is Hui Yung, so Wei is generation name, and Han is the name that I have. Another thing to be mindful of is that there are different names. So in Chinese, you have courtesy names, you have milk, people like nicknames, milk names. When babies were born, they were called a certain name, and then when they reached adulthood, they got another name. When they died, they often also received another name. And this can be complicated when you have one name and you cannot find it in the clan book. So you just need to be mindful of, then you can think, did you have brothers, did you have cousins, so you can cross-check. Another complication is a lot of names, especially from Guangdong, have in it, like Ai, or is actually just a nickname. It doesn't mean anything. So then, in terms of surnames, one example of how characters have been organized according to dialects and the complications that brings. If you take a surname Chin, Chin, that could actually be like, I don't know, 10 different characters. Chin, Chin, Zheng. It could be a lot of different, look, all those characters have throughout history been romanized in the letters Chin. The other way around, if you take the character Chen, that has been romanized in a lot of different variants too. Like Chen, Chen, Xin, Xin. Even like if you go to the Philippines, we've had a few clients that were named Tan Chanko or Tan Toko, where the first part of the name is Tan, and that comes from Chen, but then they added something to make it sound more Spanish. Basically, and my grandfather's brother, so my name is Lee, as was of course my grandfather, his brother had to take on an Indonesian name. So Lee was changed into Lee Manto. So that's also one of the things that you should be mindful of. And depending on what country your ancestors settled in, you can then sort of deduce what Chinese character that was. So where to find the info? First of all, what you need to do, and this, you don't necessarily have to go to China first, right? You always start with what you have in your direct environment. You always ask people, well, what can you find out from traces that you might have in your attic, from information that your aunt might have. And what we're especially asking, again, are traces with names of places and individuals. So key traces that might hold that information are tombstones. Tombstones often have names of the place, obviously the name of the deceased, but also the name of the place that the deceased was from. Travel documents, like old passports, photos with scribbles on the back. Birth, death, marriage certificates are slightly more rare, especially in China itself. They only came about much later during the People's Republic era. So sometimes in the US, or in Hong Kong especially actually, when you have birth and marriage certificates, they just parents, so it's still useful, but it depends on what your migration pattern, your migration history was. And then oral history, so you should always ask as much as possible to aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers that you might have that might know. There's always more, there's more knowledge, more collective knowledge among the family than you think. So general databases for free, you can actually, there's quite a lot of websites and databases out there. You know, if you see names that sound a bit familiar, Family Search is the Mormon church, so they have an enormous collection of sources. The problem with most of these collections is that they're not searchable. So they have images online, and if you know how to search, if you really know what you're looking for, and if you read Chinese, you can find them, for instance, on Family Search. But it's not, you cannot type in a name yet and then have a search engine do the work for you. That's what we're developing now, and I'll go into that later. But the other key, like Ancestry.com, I think you were at Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, those are key genealogical firms that mostly target people with European ancestry.
Or
so
African
there's
ancestry.
very little Chinese.
Or African ancestry.
Or they do or they don't, you think?
No, it's not just Europeans, it's also African Americans as well.
But do you find that when you go back to like pre-slavery in Western Africa and Central Africa, they have good?
No, it's African Americans. Enslaved people, free people.
Yeah. So,
Ancestry.com is
so that's a
really
great
great.
point. So yeah. the history while in the U.S., that's covered by these guys.
Yeah.
But the history pre-U.S., yeah, exactly. That's not covered. Well, but thanks for clarifying. Well, most of these you can at least start. You can at least try them out for free, and then yeah, you can see where you basically hit a roadblock, and obviously then you can contact us. So what happens though if you have found, if you think you found a village? The key thing after you have a name is to find out what the contemporary name and the contemporary location is. Again, because I said a lot of the historical names are not the contemporary names. A lot of jurisdictions have changed. So yeah, Google and Baidu. Baidu is the Chinese Google, is a good place to start because it's free and easy. Well, this is harder for non-Chinese speakers, but there are Chinese government bureaus that do help people. So there are overseas Chinese associations and overseas Chinese bureaus that are affiliated to government, and they have people that would know or might be able to help you, especially if you're from Northern India. The problem is though that they typically don't have any English speakers. And then if you really think you found it, the real thing is to go and visit and see what's there and meet family, see if there's still, and this is the most important thing, a lot of people, when I asked them, okay, what did you do on your village visit? Did you find your tupu? And then a lot of people say, oh, I actually didn't know that I had to look for it, which is a little bit of a waste. So yeah, I would encourage you, if you want to go, be prepared and know what you're going to look for. So key things that you would want to ask for when you're in the village are a family or a clan book, a tiapu or a tupu. Ancestral temples with tablets, so wooden tablets have information about ancestors. Family houses, graves. Graves are important because they also contain dates. Tupu or tiapu, they contain names, they contain ancestral biographies, other descriptive information, but rarely do they contain years and dates. So it's good if you have different sources that you can put together to really create a larger, comprehensive overview of your ancestry. Obviously stories. What we usually do when we go into a village of a customer, first thing we do is just talk to elderly villagers that are sitting around on the street and ask them. Best way to ask them is to bring pictures and just ask them if they remember those people and what they remember of those people. There's always something that comes out of that. Maybe they don't know it themselves, but then they'll know somebody else to ask. And usually you get very animated discussions about who was who and who wasn't who and who was not his brother. But yeah, it's always fun.